Punishment in the Congo Free State under Leopold II. The 19th century. The horrific atrocities that took place in the Congo Free State are often compared to the Holocaust, with King Leopold II of Belgium being compared to the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler. Between 1885 and 1908, Leopold II personally ruled the Congo in sub-Saharan Africa, which was largely unexplored at this time, as only the coastal areas had been claimed by other European countries. He named it the Congo Free State, which is rather ironic when you realize what went on there. The local population was anything but free. In order to acquire the Congo, in 1879 the king sent Henry Morton Stanley to survey the Congo River Basin area. He was a journalist and an explorer who, like the king, saw great economic possibilities in Africa. Under the guise of the King's Holding Company, which laughingly was devoted to free trade and the suppression of the slave trade, he established trading outposts along the navigable river, along with fortified military posts, built roads and bridges, and made treaties with over 500 Congolese chieftains. In return for putting their marks on the mysterious pieces of paper, the chiefs unwittingly accepted the flag of the Congo Association and only received cheap trinkets, bags of salt, and lengths of cloth for their trouble. The king found the perfect political moment to acquire the Congo during the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. By now, many explorers were going to Africa to claim vast areas of land on behalf of their own country, and this had become known as the Scramble for Africa, and was leading to the carving up of the continent by the major powers. Using skillful and cunning diplomacy, Leopold was able to secure the Congo River Basin for himself, and this is when he renamed the territory the Congo Free State. Now he was the absolute ruler of an area that was nearly 80 times the size of Belgium. In addition to that, he found himself in the right technological moment in time. To consolidate his grip on the Congo, he needed the right tools. These tools hadn't been available to the colonists of old, but proved to be crucial now. A few thousand men were, with these tools, able to dominate the land holding 20 million Africans. The first of these modern tools was the weaponry. The primitive muzzle loaders were replaced by the new breech-loading rifles, such as the Albini, and if the Congolese wanted to resist, they could only obtain the former weapons, plus the traditional bow and arrow and the spear. The breech-loading rifles were far superior. They shot much further, were more accurate, and used quick-loading waterproof brass cartridges. Also, firing guns in the rain would no longer be a problem, as it had been when using gunpowder. Secondly, medical knowledge was just as important. Europeans weren't used to the tropical climate and the diseases it carried. This resulted in a very high mortality rate for them. Around about 1900, the Europeans had learned that quinine was a useful defense against malaria. Diseases such as malaria and hematuria were now better understood. Some researchers could also treat yellow fever and many other diseases. The death rates therefore dropped significantly. The final and most important new tool was the paddle steamboat. This was especially useful in the case of the Congo's unusual topography. These steamboats were able to make the long voyage from Europe to Africa easier and faster, which meant that a fixed travel schedule could be maintained. These boats carried the waves of Leopold's agents into Africa. Although Leopold had used the activities of Arab slave traders to justify becoming involved in the Congo, he completely ignored the fact that slavery was banned and illegal. By the final decade of the 19th century, John Boyd Dunlop's 1887 invention of inflatable rubber bicycle inner tubes and the popularity of the automobile dramatically increased global demand for rubber. Therefore, this rubber boom became a godsend for the king. He had accumulated a great number of debts due to his investments in the Congo and needed to make this whole enterprise profitable. Because harvesting rubber from a tree was faster and easier than from a vine, output could be increased and therefore more profit made. To make sure that the extraction of rubber from the rubber trees would be maximized, he created a labor policy and practically enslaved the natives. This policy is known by critics as the Red Rubber System, in reference to the African blood that was shed during this period. Methods included robbing the natives of their livestock and grain supplies, attacking them, and then taking their women and children as hostages. If the required quota of rubber was presented by the chieftain of the district, then the women and children were sold back to their families. They had to pay a couple of goats apiece for them. If a man refused to work, this could result in the death of his wife, and if a whole settlement refused to work for the rubber companies, then a detachment of soldiers from the force publique would be sent to destroy their village and kill anyone who was foolish enough not to flee the area. So, the workers were to extract rubber with minimal expenses and under terrible conditions. The agents Leopold had sent to the Congo used forced labor and slave labor to ensure this happened, and the quotas were met. In 1885, Leopold formally united his agents and mercenaries under the title of the Force Publique. Their purpose was to maintain law and order in the Congo Free State. These men enforced the rubber quotas and were armed not only with modern weapons, but also with the chicote. This was a bullwhip made of hippopotamus skin and was used to beat the natives for any misdemeanor or just for their own sadistic enjoyment. As if the beatings and abductions weren't bad enough, the soldiers of the Force Publique also used to cut off the right hands of the natives as punishment if they refused to work or didn't meet their impossible work quotas. Some managed to survive this mutilation, but many died, mostly when gangrene set in and the wound became infected. If they killed a native by shooting them, then the soldiers were made to cut off the right hand of their victim to show that a bullet hadn't been wasted, as the ammunition was imported from Europe and was expensive to buy, and the soldiers would often try and use their issued bullets to hunt the wildlife for sport or to complement their meager rations. They would also try and stockpile the ammunition in case of the idea of mutiny ever manifested itself, so that they would be prepared for it. If a villager decided to flee the horrors and run away, then the soldiers would round up their entire family and systematically amputate their hands or feet. But not only hands, as noses and ears were also cut off. While these mutilations were performed on living people, they were mostly carried out on villagers who had been killed. There were survivors of these massacres that said they pretended to be dead while the attacks went on, and managed to remain motionless when the soldiers hacked off their hands, and only sought help when the soldiers had gone. In some cases, the soldiers could reduce their length of service with the Force Publique by bringing extra severed hands to present to the European post commanders, but this practice only led to even more unnecessary mutilations. The hands became like a currency for the guards, and sometimes they were the resource they went out to harvest instead of rubber. Captain Léon Rom was a soldier who was the main administrator at one of the heavily fortified trading stations at Stanley Falls in the Congo, and it was said that he used the severed heads of at least 21 Congolese as a border decoration around the flower beds in front of his house. The practice of having skulls on display was not particularly unusual in Central African society at the time. Another horrific incident reported that the Force Publique soldiers tied 10 villagers inside a fishing net, weighed it down with rocks, and then dragged them into the river to drown. King Leopold was said to frown upon the practice of cutting off hands as it was counterproductive to the useful deployment of the labor force. He is reported as shouting, "Cut off everything else but not their hands. The one thing I need in the Congo is hands." The exact death toll is not known. 4 closely connected sources combine the whole population loss, though. Primarily, it was the wholesale genocide of the natives, followed by starvation, exhaustion, and exposure. Then there were the diseases. Some were natural, like the sleeping sickness outbreak, which was caused by the bite from a tsetse fly. After initial symptoms, including a fever, headaches, and aching joints, the victim then started to hallucinate, fall into a coma, and die. Some diseases were introduced by the Europeans, such as various venereal diseases and smallpox. Lastly, there was the falling birth rate, which was relative to a declining population. Edmond Dane Morel, one of the important figures who exposed the atrocities to the world, said that the Congo Free State consisted of 20 million people before King Leopold II came on the scene. Mark Twain, a prominent writer who also condemned what happened in the Congo, mentioned a number of 10 million deaths. So approximately half the population was wiped out during this period. The exact number of deaths as a result of Leopold's atrocities in the Congo is unknown, but it's definitely in the millions.